Hello and welcome to the Free Outside Show. We have an awesome show again today. We're having on another Jeff because it is Jeff month, the month of Jeff. Cue intro.
Month of Jeff.
Beyond that, wow, it is contract season and Tara Dower's contract just was released, or at least it was written about. I would guess it's probably around $200,000 from Ultra, with a lot of fringe things that have needed to be taken care of for a long time, like pregnancy, body work, and race obligations. So basically that means that they're not going to force her to run for a photo shoot or anything right around a race, because a lot of brands like to do activations, especially around like Western states and things like that, which involves photo shoots and stuff. And as an athlete, those are exhausting and you're supposed to perform your best at the race. So it's nice that there's parameters around that. The pregnancy side is groundbreaking. This is really big moving forward for everyone in the trail space for the reason of it's public. And especially for women, I think it's really good to put out there that it can be public and you can ask for things like this in your contract, because in the trail space, it's really broken where everything is behind like a wall. Like there's NDAs everywhere. People don't want their salaries out there in the open, which means when people are negotiating, they don't know what other people make. So it's kind of messy in knowing what to ask for and what your worth is, because you don't really know how things are slotted as far as where you fit in the grand scheme of things with the brand or on the payroll and stuff like that. And it's also interesting. So you hear the number 200,000, but she's paid as basically a contractor. So she's not provided benefits. So someone making $200,000 with benefits is providing basically a compensation package that is more full than an athlete. And so, yes, it's a good chunk of money, but it does come with a number of things I don't know the ins and the outs of the contract, but likely going to have to pay for herself. So that's just a little bit of how it goes, but it's a really big moment for the sport. I think the biggest thing that people aren't talking about with it is the fact that it's open and out there. It's something to talk about if you're another athlete, and that's the only way we're going to move things forward. So in the article, it was a range. I think it was like 150K to 250K, which Ultra, the shoe company known for Zero Drop, wanted to put out there, so that it wasn't exact, but I would guess 200K is probably the number. But it's just really important to have that so that when other athletes go into negotiating and stuff, they know their worth and there's at least a point on the scale. Before this, everything was blank as far as what athletes made in the trail world space. I think it was more open with what influencers made, because you could do CPMs and things like that, but which is basically charging a certain amount per engagement on a post or per your audience. Versus this it's more the brand's ability to market around Tara and having a bunch of other stuff filled out, from a YouTube channel to press about her and a social media following and the Appalachian Trail record. So super cool to see things are moving forward. And it's really cool to see a brand build their trail team around a woman, but she also has the overall fastest time on the Appalachian Trail. Okay. We also interviewed her a few episodes ago, so you should go check that out. That was my speech. Oh yeah, I dyed my hair pink because obviously it's December. It's been really stressful. It's contract season, which means I have some that I've been working on and calls and stuff like that. So it's always a stressful time of year trying to figure out how to set yourself up for the future, go from there. Pink hair. Also click follow on the podcast app that you're on. It really, really helps the show. I'm actually negotiating to blow this thing up even more. No, we got some sponsors interested in stuff for the new year. So just helping grow this thing and sharing it on social media really helps too. You can put that out there. Really appreciate it. I'll continue to share thoughts. This has really made me a better person, learning to just talk to the void, and eventually it gets out to all you guys. And also every Wednesday, I put out a like 10-minute about whatever I want episode on Patreon. You can follow that for $5 a month, patreon.com/freeoutside. A bunch of stuff is on freeoutside.com too, continually putting stuff there. I don't know how I produce so much, but I just like to, and I have a fear of having to get a corporate job again. So I probably work twice as much just producing stuff, putting stuff out there. So if you can help with that, if you are a brand and want to sponsor this, or if you want to jump on Patreon and throw $5 this way, we can ward off having to work in corporate America, and I can continue doing this podcast, putting stuff out there. I also have kind of solidified what I'm going to do next year, and it's pretty big. And I think I talk about that in the Patreon episode that came out this last Wednesday. So you can check that out. All right. If you've pressed follow, that's huge. And here is Jeff Browning as part of the month of Jeff. All right. Another edition of the month of Jeff here on the Free Outside podcast. Here joining us is Jeff Browning, who's finished, it says on his website, nearly 200 ultra marathons, and I did not try to count that high.
It's over
It's over now. Okay,
it's
so
over
he needs to update
now.
the website.
I need
and
to update
over 40 wins, and the coolest stat that I didn't know is 7 times he's been voted in the Ultra Runner of the Year by Ultra Running Magazine. Top 10. Yeah, that's a really cool longevity stat. I mean,
and
that's
only guy
7
over
years.
50. Only guy over 50 to ever make that list.
Yeah, that's so fun and crazy. And I think it offers like a lot of, maybe not necessarily a roadmap, but at least hope for anyone getting into the sport at any age that you can be successful. What do you think has helped you just have that longevity?
Oh, I mean, a lot there. Obviously it's complex, and there's a lot of it's
Totally.
multi-layered. I mean, I've been in sports, like some kind of sports, since I was like 6 years old. So I've never not done sports. So like 4 sports a year in the 80s, like 70s and 80s, like baseball, football, basketball, wrestling. Kind of, I dabbled in both of those in the winter, and then track and field in the spring. And so like every season kind of ran into the next season. So you're always working out year round. And I also had a coach who adopted strength training when I was in junior high, early adopter in the 80s for football. And our high school in Missouri was football crazy. And so everything revolved around Friday Night Lights. And you wanted to start, and play football your whole life.
Oh, yeah.
Like we grew up, playing Nerf ball behind the stands. As soon as your parents would let you go behind the stands, you were back there the whole time until you're old enough to watch the game and like analyze it. So, I think that foundation of strength training 4 days a week. We were on the Nebraska strength training program. One of our coaches came from the University of Nebraska, our offensive coordinator, and he brought that strength training session to my head coach, who then converted a wrestling room into a gym, into a full free weight gym when I was in like 8th grade. And so I lifted 4 days a week from 8th grade through senior year, lifted all through college, and then we got into mountain biking in college and was always running 3 days a week. And so I was always doing all these sports and like backpacking and climbing 14ers when I moved to Denver. And then, in my early like graphic design career in my 20s. And so I was always like adventuring in the mountains. Or once I moved to the mountains in the late 90s from Missouri, I was always like doing something outdoors. And so I have a huge foundation. I have a decade of hardcore cycling before I got into ultra running in my late 20s, and then 25 years of ultra running. I've kept strength training pretty much in there most of that time. I've had little seasons where I kind of fell off the wagon, but the last 15 years I've hardly fallen off the wagon at all. Since hit my 40s, for sure. And then the other piece would be nutrition. I think nutrition, strength. I've had to embrace a little more mobility in my late 40s, early 50s, and prioritize that a little more and dial in my diet even more. But those are kind of those are the low hanging fruit, I would say, the big puzzle pieces.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about more on the side of like, have you ever experienced burnout, or has it been hard to be motivated to come back year after year? Because you've repeated so many races too.
Oh man. I mean, some years, yes, but I'm pretty self-motivated. Like I
Hmm.
just I like the process of training and being in the woods. And I've always lived, since 2000, I've always lived, and I got into ultra running in '01. So since 2000, I've lived in mountain towns my whole life. So I've had trail right out the door, relatively close. So I could train on dirt, or at least 50, 60% dirt, every week. And all my long runs and all bigger runs could be on dirt and on single track. So it's easy to be motivated when you can run in the woods all the time. If I had to go pound the pavement
Totally.
every day, that would be kind of hard to be motivated to
Yeah,
do it all the time. But I mean, I love the process of training, and I have trouble sitting still. Like I'm definitely kind of
totally.
I was the kid growing up that was spazzy, dude. Like I was bouncing off the walls, running all over the place, foaming at the mouth practically. I was so hyper, And so my parents put me in 4 sports a
Totally.
year and like put me under coaches. My dad coached part of the time. I had other guys that mentored me too as coaches. And so like I always was under someone, being mentored by some man that was, coaching some sport. And they were funneling that energy into that.
Yeah. And I think you're a really good person to ask this to. And we've had a lot of coaches, and I coach myself. But especially as the sport's exploding, I wanted to, with having, about 10 years of experience yourself and coaches under you, what are the pros and cons of having a coach with being coached yourself and coaching others? Because I do think it's probably not for everyone, whether financially or not, but it can be a huge help too. So I just wanted to hear from your side what kind of the benefits or the drawbacks of a coach are.
Well, I mean, I think the benefits are definitely like an intelligent training plan, hopefully.
Yeah,
And
totally.
hopefully they're not burning you into the ground, knowing your history. So it's custom coaching too. I mean, at least my services are learning who you are,
Mhm.
your background in running, how long you've been doing it, all the history of injuries, things you've done well, things you have struggled with. And then we're fine tuning that coaching. So the beauty of ultra running coaching is that you're not, I mean, if you are hiring a coach, they should be dealing not only with training, but they should be dealing with race nutrition, even some lifestyle nutrition, at least
Mhm.
recommendations for recovery, uh, and those kind of pieces as well, and gear and everything else that goes along, because we have so many moving parts to ultra running that can really make or break a race. So I do think that they can help you uh, especially newer ultra runners or uh, less experienced ultra runners. They're going to should accelerate your knowledge of ultra running by say 5 years instead of 5 years or 10 years of trial and error. When I got into the sport, there weren't any
Yeah.
coaches, so you were self taught, and then you were mentored by someone in the community that you ran with, like some older guy, that's 45 years old or 50 years old who's still running ultras, who's been doing it 15 years, and he says, "Oh yeah, take S caps, you need to carry a bottle, or a pack." There weren't really packs then. Everything was handhelds when I got into the sport. Packs were like still backpacking packs, they're giant and heavy.
Totally.
They sucked. There weren't race
External
vests.
frame.
Yeah, there weren't even
External
race vests.
frame back then.
Yeah, or big
Yeah.
fat fanny packs that were like would make your stomach upset. So
That's
there
like
was
what Meltzer still wears.
yeah, totally. I would say that Bryce at Ultraspires really like fine tuned the 2-bottle waist pack. It's freaking light and pretty dialed now. But what he used to run in was pretty heavy and big. Um, but anyway, I think it can, it can really increase your knowledge really quickly. I think it also can keep you accountable. I think another thing that people overlook is, and especially for those busy ultra runners, like that have a career and have kids and a family, and they're balancing all those, it's a juggling act. The nice thing about a
Mhm.
coach is they just intelligently, you say, "Here's the race I signed up for." And then they just write the plan and you do the work, and then give them feedback. So it can be a really nice cycle. And then we can customize, if you have an injury, one of the things I do is I'm the first line of defense for an athlete if they're dealing with a niggle or a sore, something that's sore, like a sore knee or a sore hip or something, then we're going to say, okay, try this before you go spend money at a PT. Go try these 4 things for a week, and do something that doesn't aggravate it, and I'm giving them permission to not run. I'm saying, go cross train on your bike, go get on an elliptical, something that doesn't aggravate it. Let's invoke the 2-day rule, right? And for me, the 2-day rule is like, if you have a niggle, 2 days cross training that doesn't aggravate it, and then test it on day 3. And if it's still there, go back to the 2-day rule. 2 more days of cross training, continue to work on mobility, work on foam rolling, stretching, go get a massage, like throw the kitchen sink at it, and then hopefully within a week, we've got you back running again, even if it's short. So it just depends,
Totally.
if we can head things off at the pass, because I have a lot of athletes that'll, even after years of experience, will continue to go. They won't even tell me that they're like, oh yeah, my arch is sore. And I hear about it 2 weeks later. They don't write it in their, they don't write it in their feedback in their training log. They don't text you. And then all of a sudden you get on your, we do a coaching calls every 3 weeks because I got to write blocks in 3-week blocks. And then we talk 3-week block, we talk, and then they can text and email me in between and then feedback, a training log and stuff and training peaks. And so one of the things, sometimes you'll have guys that'll be like, oh yeah, my heel's been sore for, 2 weeks. I'm like, what? You're like, we need to head that off the path. That's plantar fasciitis. We got to work on that right away, So, the key is like communicating too. I think another thing, if you're going to get a coach, it's important to communicate. Even if it's not that big of a deal, it's worth a text, and just to tell your coach, hey,
that's the first thing I tell new athletes. First thing I tell them is like, communicate everything. It's way better to know, and you're paying for a coach, and I'm just coaching a robot if I don't have any input from the other side.
Yeah, exactly. So you do need, it is a 2-way street, right? And you're paying that coach. So it's okay to communicate. It's okay to bother them, right? I try to have that conversation. You're not bothering me. Text me. Like, that's what you're paying me for. So, that's part of our job, is to help them kind of hopefully head that stuff off at the pass. I luckily have one of our coaches is a physical therapist as well. So we use her knowledge at times. Trish Ahrens is on our coaching list, and she's really good at we have some videos from her on plantar fasciitis, how to like rehab it and that kind of stuff. So, it's always good to have multiple coaches too, being able to bounce things off of, at least that's my recent expansion in the business has been to bring coaches on. And that's been a cool factor because they make me think, stuff I wouldn't think of, they think of. And then they go, oh yeah, what about this? I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Sweet. Okay. Yeah, let's try it.
Totally. Yeah, especially as the sport gets more diverse, broader, races popping up everywhere. Like, it's so different, at least I'm assuming, than when you started 20 years ago.
Oh, dude. Okay. Here's a crazy stat. In when I got into sport in 2001, there were 3,300 milers in North America. I think it's over 200 now, right? Just the expansion of races, right, in the 100-mile distance is insane. Like, there's so many options, and you could race every weekend. And it used to be like just kind of some big 100-mile races, and that was it. So the sport's definitely changed a lot. I luckily got into sport in the Pacific Northwest, and there was like, Oregon had an ultra series back then, like in the 2000s. They had like 6 races of like 50K up to like 100K, I think, or 50 miles in Oregon. And you could run that series. And so when I first got into sport, that's what we did. We mainly ran just regional races that were like within 3-hour radius of our house, of Bend. We just went over the valley and ran stuff in Portland and Eugene and stuff like that. But now it's like, there's so many races. It's crazy.
Totally. I want to go down that avenue since we're there. What was it like? What was the training theory? What was the training philosophy when you started? Like, what would you guys do as a group?
Well, I got into sport more from like finishing them, meaning I wasn't doing it from a performance perspective. I was just trying to get my qualifier for Western States so I could run 100 miles. So my introduction to the sport was Western States 100. And I was like, I want to do that. And there's something in me that just said, I want to check that box. And so then I was like, well, I guess I better run a half marathon and a marathon, before I do that. So I did that in 2000. And then 2001, I ran a 50K, two 50Ks and a 50 miler to get my qualifier. Because back then there was a 50-mile qualifier for Western States. Put myself in the lottery in 01 for the 02 race. Got in because it was a 50% chance of getting in.
Oh, I was going to ask, 50% chance of getting
in the lottery. So if you think about that, right, whatever they have now, 300, I think it's 369 slots or something. And you might have 212 in the lottery because of all the spoken for spots with the golden ticket races and sponsors and all that. So when you take away all those spots, there's like 212 spots or something. But I mean, it was the equivalent of like only like 400 or 500 people entered the race, right? So because it was a 50-50 chance of getting in the lot. And me and two buddies all got in our first try. And so that was my first 100 in 2002. And so the sport was, I really didn't start focusing on performance until like 03, 04. Because 01, 02, I was just trying to figure them out. I was hiking the hills, running everything else. I was still spending time on my mountain bike because I had some muscle imbalances from all the years of cycling. And I fixed them with actually a strength training coach. I was a graphic designer and I had some trade out. I was a poor graphic designer at the time because I was new. I just started my own business in Bend. And so I was building that at the time. And so I didn't have any extra cash. So this guy needed a bunch of branding and he had a like private gym that he did one-on-one coaching with. And he was a power lifter, like background in the Marines. And so I went to this guy who was an ex-Marine that just beat the crap out of me in the gym with a bunch of machines, but he also took me through an analysis, which was the first time I saw kind of the hint of how coaching works, because it was strength training coaching, but he was like, oh yeah, your quads are, your hamstrings or your quads on curl leg extension, your quads should be like 1.5 times stronger than your hamstrings. But because of all the clipped in and like pulling on the backstroke on the bike all those years, my hamstrings were way overdeveloped compared to my quads. And so I was getting runner's knee all the time, like patella maltracking and hip tendonitis type symptoms. And I kept having to take, 6 weeks here, 4 weeks there off from running and get back on the bike. And he, in 2 off seasons, basically fixed it with strength training. I never had an issue again with that kind of like patella maltracting. Because and
he was ahead of his time with analysis and solving.
It was awesome. I mean, it really like, for me, it also like, it kind of solidified the importance of a strategic strength training program for ultra running.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And what was it like with, like, how would you even know how to train for 100 miler? Were there, I guess blogs might be just starting around that time?
Well, yes, blogs were starting. So everybody was doing a blog about 2000, right, 2002, 2003. So blogs got really popular in like 02, 03, blew up in like 04, 05, 06. And so that's, before social media and smartphones. So, everybody had a little flip phone, and that's it. That was your cell phone. And everybody still had a landline. So we were trying to like read everything we could get our hands on blogs for training. Run100s.com was a good resource at the time. And so I used that stuff a lot. And actually my wife, I still have the book probably in my library somewhere. It was The Lydiard Method by Arthur Lydiard. So, middle distance marathon coach from the last century, New Zealand, big influencer of Bill Bowerman's training philosophy at University of Oregon. It was like Steve Prefontaine's coach. And so I got hold of his book I got a hardback version. My wife found a hardback version at a garage sale. And she brings it home. She says, I thought you might like this. And this is like 04, maybe 03. And I was just trying to start getting fast, and I just got on the Montreal Patagonia team. in 03. Like there was like an A team, a B team, and like a C team, and I was like on the C team, and because I'd gotten like fourth or fifth at fifth at Wasatch in 04. And so 03, 04, I just gotten sponsored. And it was back then, it was like you get like 2 pairs of free shoes and a kit, like or something for the year.
For
it was
the
like
whole year.
Yeah, for the whole year. It was a horrible sponsorship. But I mean, that's the way it was back then. No one was getting paid yet. I think Meltzer.
Yeah, it's even before Montreal, I think.
Yeah. So Montreal Patagonia disbanded at the end of 05 because Columbia bought Montreal. And then I went to the Patagonia team. We started that Patagonia grassroots Patagonia ultrarunning team, which was around for maybe like 7 or 8, 10 years before they just went to ambassadors in each kind of vertical, trail running, climbing, all that. And I became an ambassador at there. But prior to that, it was just like these small teams, right? It was 2 small grassroots companies. Patagonia was a small company at the time. Montreal was like 20 employees in Seattle. And so they teamed up, and Patagonia provided the kit and the clothing, and Montreal provided the shoes. And like people like Jurek and Speed Goat were, Carl Meltzer were both like A team back then, so I think they were making maybe a little bit of money, it couldn't have been more than like $2,000 or $3,000 a year, I'm sure. And then, and a bunch of free gear, right? And maybe a travel budget. But like it was a small team, the A team was. But then, fast forward, I went to the Patagonia team, and then by the 2010s, we were starting to get some kind of contracts in the sport, That's when it finally kind of started to like be like, hey, because Jurek was the first one to go to Brooks, and then like, hey, he's got a contract.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck? Like, they're paying trail runners?
Totally.
So it was cool, though. The early years was, we all were doing it because we loved it. And we were going to do it whether we got paid or not, It was so like the early, like, cowboy days. We didn't, a lot of what we did, there were a few guys that were really training smart, like Jurek, he was really strategically training, and that's why he was so successful in those early years. He was just really focused. I was just kind of by the seat of my pants, I didn't really start getting hold of like intelligent training until I got that Lydiard book in like 04. And that's when I read that thing cover to cover. I earmarked pages, like came back and reread sections. And so I started to use some of those philosophies of training. And then coupled that with that coach I was doing strength training with. And then I won my first 100 in 05. And so then I was like, after having I got hold of Chi Running for technique, the Chi Running book. I bought the VHS tapes, like back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah. I bought VHS tapes, and the book came with it. And so I read that book cover to cover. I read Lydiard's training method, or the Lydiard way, or the Lydiard. I think maybe it's the Lydiard way or the Lydiard method. I can't remember the name of the book. But anyway, I read that. And that led me to other books. Every time my wife would go to Barnes & Noble or something, I'd be over in like the training section looking for like running books on like, marathon training and different kinds of training philosophies. And so that's where I got hold of Lore of Running, Jack Daniel's Way or Jack Daniel's Method or whatever. What else did I get hold of? Some other Healthy Intelligent Training, the Lydiard Way. There's a bunch of books that were early.
Yeah, it's called Run the Lydiard Way, published in 1978.
There you go, baby. I have the hardback of that from a garage
That's
sale.
Awesome. That needs to be the front page of like your coaching website, is you reading the book, and it's like,
yeah, totally.
Still holds up.
Still holds up. His philosophy still holds up. It's what the Kenyans do too. So it's really cool philosophy. It was really good stuff. And so I started reading all that stuff and reading blogs. I just reached out to recently after David Roche got the Leadville record. I was in the sport, following the sport when Matt Carpenter broke that record. I was following his blog, like I subscribed to his blog. And so I got, emails when he posted new stuff. And he was very, he was very transparent, and this dates me, dude, because that was a 19-year record. So I've been in the sport since before his record. And so I was like, I reached out to David and said, hey man, I just want to say good job, because I was following that performance when it happened. Like, I followed him the year before when he blew up. He was on course record pace, leading, and blew up and had to walk the last 20 miles. He ran 80 miles, blew up, walked the last 20 for 10th place. So, and he was like way ahead of the course record. So the next year, I followed his training from that moment till he broke the record the next year. So like 12 months of training, I followed his blog, exactly what he was doing. He was really transparent about his training, what he did, how much he trained, what kind of training. One of my favorite quotes from him was like, when he was going for the second time, because that was back pre-Golden Trail Series, right? Short. There's the Vail mountain running thing, and all the stuff in Colorado, all the mountain running stuff in Colorado. There was a whole
Pikes
short
Peak,
series.
Yeah, Pikes Peak back then.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it was all part of this series. And he was doing that series when he broke the record in I think it's 05. And so what he did was, he had this great quote. He goes, I just figured if I was going to err on anything, I'm going to err on the side of speed. So he just did tons of his normal speed work he would do in hard uphill running for like short mountain trail stuff and like 10K and half marathon distance. And then he did like one long run a week still, but he did it fast.
Yeah.
So he did everything fast, like kind of actually very, very similar, very similar to what the way, David's been really like transparent about his training. And it's totally. It's actually very similar. It's not as much volume, like Matt ran more volume. But if you counted the bike volume,
we had David on here too.
Yeah, and David like spent 2 days a week on the bike, and if you count that bike volume, it's the equivalent of the volume that Carpenter was doing too. So it's really interesting, like that kind of stuff. Like that was like when he showed up on the scene and got that record. It was like, whoa, okay, that's really intelligent training. He's like thinking through. He had taken down. He even talked about his nutrition. He didn't even stop at aid stations. His wife just handed him an old school Camelback, the old school ones, like the neoprene ones. They were just a neoprene sleeve with two like purple straps. And she would just hand him a new one. He had two. It had 2-liter bladder in it. She just handed it to him. He'd run through it to like 10K race pace, like grab it, throw it on, and then like take off out of there. And he had like carbohydrates. He had carbohydrates mixed in his flask or in his he had the right amount for every section he was going to see his wife. And he knew he got so many carbs every 3 minutes with like a sip every 3 minutes with so many carbs equals so many carbs an hour. Like he was getting scientific about it. And I was just like, I never thought about it that deeply. And that was like, for me, it started like that road to like dialing in nutrition and hydration and everything for racing and being really efficient through aid stations. And that was like, that was like a challenge because you read about it and you're like, oh, well, that's what he's doing. Well, I want to emulate that.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. All right, I got another funny stat for you. Mike Tyson never fought a professional boxing match while Matt Carpenter held that record. Isn't that crazy?
Whoa.
Mike Tyson never fought while Carpenter held the record.
That's
19 years. Isn't that crazy?
That is
and then
so
it was
crazy.
broken and he fights again.
Oh.
Yeah.
All the universe is tied together.
What was it? Yeah, totally. Yeah. What was nutrition like back in the early 2000s? It had to be so different than now.
All I did was S-caps and gels. Like I did goo, like a ton of goo. Like I drank water in my bottles. I took S-caps, like Succeed caps are really high in sodium. Because that's what all the like veterans were doing around me. Like everyone that were performing were like, oh yeah, man, S-caps and water and then take gels. And so I just took back then I was doing high carb back in those days. Through 2015, I was doing high carb. So I was probably pushing 3 gels an hour during that time.
Mm-hmm. And ASCAPs are electrolytes for anyone listening.
Yeah, it's sodium and potassium, basically pills. I was taking a couple of those. I think I was taking one every 30 minutes. I didn't know you did it per liter. Now we understand you do it per liter, right? Sodium or they take, but back then it was just like, take 2 an hour, one every 30 minutes and drink a bunch of water and then pop gels. So, I used to drink, I have a couple of pictures, from my Patagonia days when I was working with, Fred Marmsader, one of the contract photographers for Patagonia. And we were getting ready for, I think, Run Rabbit Run. And I was at his house pre-race. And I used to mix everything in little 6-ounce flasks with a push-pull valve. Hammer used to make these little tiny 6-ounce hard flasks. And so they're like mini water bottles. And they're tiny. And they could fit in your pockets. So they'd fit in the pockets of my shorts. And I could carry 2 of them. And I could get 5 gels in each and then an ounce of water. So it'd make it more liquidy. So I would have to manually take gel flasks or goos and put them in like 5 in each flask and make like 30 flasks. So I would have like 75 gels laid out on a table that I'd be mixing into flasks before 100 milers. I think the most I ever took in 100 miler was 75 gels.
Oh my gosh. So 1 every 1.25 miles, basically.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I took so many.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I just want to hit on this. It's almost like a lost period, this blog period, but it was so fun because you could see like Jeff Rose had one. Anton, of course, was the famous one, but everyone at least once a week, sometimes more, would post like their weekly training roundup and like how many in each zone or how many hard, how many easy, how many or moderate
how much
miles
they got that week.
Yep.
There was no Strava.
Yeah. How are you tracking that? When you would run, how would you track how far you went?
Okay, here's how I did mine. I was a mountain biker, and back then you had a mountain bike computer on your mountain bike. So it was like the wheel circumference that, and that was wired up to a little computer on your handlebar, and then it tracked your mileage. So that's how you kept track of miles. And so what I bought these little books at Barnes and Noble, and they were like just paper with lines, they were little small booklets. And I would write down every day the date, and then I would write down in my training log like miles, kind of what route I did, weather, how I felt. I kept that. I still have them somewhere stored. Like I have a stack of them, of all the date ranges. Years I did that until the technology caught up to where we could do something online. There was I can't even remember what it's called. There was something pre-Strava, and that was before Strava, and there's a bunch of us on it. And then finally Strava showed up, and then we all switched to Strava, because it kind of owned this other app. But it was just a website, and I kept track of everything on paper. But I'd go ride the routes, or all my main routes. I would go ride on my mountain bike. So I knew exactly everyone's like exact mileage on everything. So I'd be like 7.2 miles, or 10.3, because and then if I'd go run a crazy route and I was like, oh, I'm not sure about the how far that is, I would have to go ride it on my mountain bike. And then I'd have to go edit my training log. It was all manual. We didn't have. All we were using was a Timex
cross training.
Totally, we just had a Timex watch, right? So yeah, so you just had to keep track or not pay attention to it, right? Mm-hmm. So it was all written for me until Strava, really. Until that, I did about a year of this other app before Strava showed up, and then I switched. I was an early adopter of Strava, because I had a buddy that was doing it. It was very social because we could trash talk at each other's training on this online thing, and before Strava, and so it was fun. We would trash talk each other, and there were probably 6 or 7 guys I knew in the ultra community across the West that were on it, and we just trash talked each other and like make comments on each other's training. And then Strava showed up, and one guy one of the guys that I was a good friend, he was like, all of a sudden he was off the software we were using, the website. And so I reached out to him and he's like, oh no, dude, there's this new thing called Strava. He goes, go check it out, Strava.com. And I went and did it. And I was like, oh, it's way sexier, you know? Their early stuff, they came out of the blocks pretty strong. And I was in tech, you know, I was a graphic designer and art director and was in the tech scene as it was evolving through the 2000s. I started in print in the 90s and then at an advertising agency and then like kind of evolved with the tech in that scene and marketing and branding and all that. So I was an early adopter of all like, you know, phones and smartphones and, you know, social media and all that just because I was in the tech scene. So that's how I found Strava. Do you think, especially like in the blog world, do you think that those blogs and having it like come out every week and seeing how big training people were doing, that led to so much overtraining syndrome across that generation? Especially when Anton got popular. Tony just started like, people were like, what? 180 miles a week with like 30,000 feet of vert, you know, at altitude? Like it was like, well, as for
and
me,
no shirt ever
a shirt, never. No, he looked like Tarzan. There's so many copycats during that time. So like, I totally, I think it made a lot of guys overtrain. That was the early days. Like around that time is when brands started to pay some athletes and like they could actually be dirtbag runners and like make enough off their contract to kind of quit their day job. They weren't like putting any money away and they were living kind of dirtbag poor, but they could go and just train all the time. And I think that did a lot of guys disservice because they didn't have to manage their time anymore. They just went and trained too much. So we saw a lot of like fallout, you know, around the 2008 to 2012 range, you know, like Tony was one of them, right?
Yeah.
Like Anton was one, like, you know, there's multiple guys that kind of
Kyle,
like,
Jeff Rose.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of just like blew.
Yeah.
Like,
do you think it saved you that you had a job?
Oh, heck yeah, dude. I had 3 kids, a wife and 3 kids, and a full-time graphic design position that of my own business. So I wore all the hats. I was a one-man show. I was basically a contractor, right? And so I had all these clients, and sometimes I was shuffling like 25 projects at once. And so like I had to like be really strategic with my time, which I couldn't overtrain. Like, you know, even if I wanted to, I could max do 12 to 15 hours a week, right? And that was squeezing it in. So, and so in the early days, you know, probably maybe 25% of that was on the bike. So I had to like squeeze the bike time in too, you know, because I couldn't run 6 days a week and higher volume because I was kind of injury prone in the early days. And then after I fixed that stuff, I was still like timid about volume because I was like, I don't want to get injured. You know, like I loved training, like we talked about earlier. I loved the process. And when I don't have it, I kind of freak out. So it was nice to like, I just learned to like, okay, balance it. Like you got to balance it so you could just train year round.
Totally. Yeah. So I guess let's just kind of move forward with one question here. Is there another trend that like sticks out that was like a crazy trend at the time, but sort of disappeared too, that you can think of?
Well, barefoot shoes.
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah, that exploded. Joe Rogan ran in barefoot shoes.
We all got like injured at one point or another trying to run in like barefoot shoes. Like I remember the first time I went out in I'd had 5 figures for like a month, and I went out and ran like 7 miles in them, and like hurt a tendon in my foot, and then I was like out for like 6 weeks. So like, you know, there's so much of that. But I have to say, when the pendulum, like one of the coolest things that came out of that scene of like barefoot running and Born to Run and all that, I mean, it really made the pendulum swing this one whole side. Like anything, the pendulum comes back towards center, but it shifted the sport. It shifted the shoe industry probably the biggest shift it ever had since the inception of running shoes. That they had constantly gotten bigger heels and bigger drops and all these things, and beefier, and more like the hiking boot industry got into trail running, which that influence made really stiff, like heavy shoes, and that made us say, hey, let's talk about what's your natural foot function, right? So that conversation changed the industry. Now, we swung back towards center, but we didn't get all the way back to the old center. We stayed over towards the barefoot side with lower drops, flexier shoes. We still saw that there needed to be some beefier stuff in lines to be able to handle like what I call a crutch, meaning I kind of look at the beefier like motion control stuff as like it's a crutch. Now, some people want to face that and get out of the crutch, and some people are just going to be on crutches for the rest of their life. But it makes you like be able to say, well, because I was in like hard orthotics by that time, because I'm a pronator. And back then in like 2004 or 3, I went to a PT because I had runner's knee. This was before the strength training thing that I worked with the strength training coach. And I went the traditional route. I went to a PT. They said, oh, you pronate. We need to control your pronation. So they got me hard orthotics. Then over the next 3 years, my feet atrophied and I got weaker, right? And then I'm wearing these stupid, stiff orthotics in trail shoes, right? On mountains when you need a flexy bottom, to get good traction and not to slap when you're going downhill, and all that stuff for your foot to function. And so that's where the barefoot running scene really brought me into the strengthening idea, because I'd come from the strength training background. So it made sense to me that we could fix this with strength. So, but focusing on the foot. So I just started focusing on like using, 5 fingers and limbs and Vivo barefoot shoes as my casual shoes. And I just started going everywhere in barefoot, mimicking shoes, no midsole, just an outsole and like a rolled up moccasin when you took it off. It was like super flexy. And you had to engage your feet when you walked around, or else your feet got sore. So I did that for years, and it took me about 5 years to wean off completely off an aftermarket or an aftermarket insole. So I went from hard orthotic to like an aftermarket softer insole that had big build in it, but kind of mirrored my orthotic. And then the next season I went to a little lower one, and the next season I went to a lower one. And over about 5 years, I weaned myself off and went to just whatever stock is,
Totally.
that comes in the shoe. And it just shows you that, we can fix it. Like, but our philosophy's changed in that, last few years.
It's really interesting. I think like Born to Run in that era, maybe was off and went too far, but I mean, it at least taught me and showed me to read some of those numbers in the specs of a shoe versus just like a shoe that looks cool type of thing as well.
Well, all of a sudden,
like
it
especially
brought up,
drop
like, what's
and stuff.
the drop? Like all of a sudden, that was a thing you asked when you went to a running store. You went, "What's the drop on that shoe?" And every salesperson, if it was a good specialty running store, knew, because after Born to Run, everyone knew what every drop was. Before that, it wasn't even a conversation piece.
Drop and stack,
Yep, exactly.
Yep, exactly. Cool. Yeah,
it was a cool time.
Do you see this?
Go ahead. I was also in a cool scene with Foot Zone and Bend. Back then, Teague Hatfield owned it. And Teague was a great friend, and I helped market the business for a long time, 20 years, when he owned it. And he doesn't own it anymore, but back then he did for a long time. And he was an early adopter of all that stuff, and he saw it as a tool, kind of like how I learned that it was a tool. He had a wall with barefoot stuff. So he was an early adopter of Ultra when they came out, and he had they had their early shoes, but he had this wall of kind of like minimal stuff. And then he had all the traditional stuff. And then he had casual wall, like Chacos and stuff like that. And so it was a really cool time to be in the running scene, because it was changing like crazy.
Oh, go for it. I think you cut out real quick.
We lost each other there for a minute.
Oh,
you're back.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think the same thing? Do you think the same thing is happening now, and it doesn't have to target? I mean, but there's just so many trends where it's like it's worked for prominent people, and now we're all adopting or experimenting, and it doesn't have to be that they're right or not, but it feels like now a trend comes out, we can use whether it's ketones or high carb fueling or things like that, that a trend comes out and it's like we're immediately all in, even though it's been around for like a year or two. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that I always am like a little skeptical when something gets huge and it's like, oh my God, this is it. I think that like anything, it's in context, and some people are going to be able to leverage it and some people won't. You know, if you want to take the long picture, you know, and at 53, man, I try to bring in the long picture, because that's what life experiences teaches you, that like, just because it seems like the best thing in the world doesn't mean it is. So, and I think that's one of the things, like we do a group coaching call with all my coaches, athletes, if they want to join, every other Monday night. So we have one tonight actually. And, we just did one on high carb fueling, and like talking about it in context. Like if you really like listen to like people that have done the research on it, it's really for performance and high output, right? So
yep,
like the person doing a 200 or the middle or back of the packer running 100, you know, I'm sorry, but if you like push 80, 90, 100 grams of carbs an hour, you're going to puke, or you're going to have garbage gut and you're going to feel like crap. So it's in context. And that's really what another job of a coach should be, to wade through all that and get rid of all of that, the marketing crap and the hype. There's a lot of hype when something first comes out, and like, oh God, this is it, you know, high carb, you know, and it's just like, well, maybe, you know, that's the answer. Maybe. Right.
Yeah. I like that approach. And especially if we want to just give people an example, like we had David Roach on, and his average heart rate compared to second place, who I think was Adrian McDonald, his was like 10 beats a minute higher, which would put him more in that carb burning zone than Adrian, 10 beats lower. So that's the exact same race, maybe 20, 30 minutes different, but a different scenario of almost overlapping circumstances, where it's like, it's not for everyone. It's not for every situation. And that's the exact same race. And that's where it's like, you need to approach it with caution. And especially in the 200 world, I like to think of it with athletes more in terms of calories and fueling rather than one type of fuel. Because if you're the standard, the middle, the median, you're out there for so many days, it's fueling your body to perform daily tasks of living at the same time as moving.
Absolutely, dude. Especially in the 200 plus, right?
Yeah.
You need real food, and you need to think about, like, I'm going to be out there 4 or 5 days. Like, I need to eat meals, you know?
Totally.
Even if it's smaller meals, but more meals per day. Maybe not 3 main meals. Maybe it's 6 smaller meals, but you still need meals.
Totally. And I want to go into that now, because in the last about a year, you've done 200 milers and the Colorado Trail. So what have you learned from this venture into multi-day, coming from pretty much 100-mile and below specialist before that?
Well, I really like the puzzle. It's a complex puzzle. It's way more complex than the 100. It makes 100 seem not that long. So it's kind of cool. And I have to say, the 490-mile Colorado Trail makes 200s not seem that long. And it made me also know that I don't want to go out for 5. Well, okay, there's 2 things I got out of the Colorado Trail I think are really cool. As a coach, I was out for 177 hours. And the average 200 plus race is 125 hours probably, right? The back of the pack.
Yeah.
And I coach back of the Packers, middle back of the Packers. So understanding what they go through was a cool thing as a coach. Like to like firsthand how out of it you are by day 4 or 5, like on 2 hours of sleep in a 24-hour window, right? Like, it's like, whoa, it's different than me being out 2 nights in the front of the pack. Right. So
totally,
that was really cool for me to understand that. And then also to be able to connect with them and say, hey, I know what you're going through. Like, I know exactly what you're going to go through because I did it. And I went longer, you know, I went another 50 hours longer than you're ever going to go. So
totally,
like, I can understand what you have to deal with. You're going to be really tired by day 4 and pretty out of it if you're not managing stuff. So You might even question like, what's my why? Why am I even doing this anymore? So I think that was a cool factor of doing the Colorado Trail.
Totally.
It also made me realize I don't want to go for fast times in something that distance again, because it's just pain cave forever. It's just like it didn't. The last 3 days weren't even fun. Like, I mean, it hurt. It hurt so bad. I just wanted to sleep. I was like thinking about sleep, fantasizing about sleep. And you can't get sleep. So, so for me, I was like, this made me really want to just focus on hundreds and 200s, after that effort, and realize that if I was going to go do something like that, I'd want to fast pack it and enjoy it, and just, maybe do it kind of fast, but still sleep, and enjoy my sleep.
What a novel concept. Enjoy something, fast pack it, not go for a competitive time.
Right? You come from a big time fast packing background. You can like at night, I would just be like, you get like a 90-minute nap in the middle of the night sometime, and so the rest of the night you're out all night and moving, and you're going past all these fast packers like single pods, in their tents. And I'm thinking about like, what kind of sleeping bag do they have? Did they read a book before they went to sleep? You're going to have instant coffee in the morning? That sounds really good.
Yeah.
I was just like, I should just go and like stick my head in the tent, Like I was just like fantasizing that they were getting 10 hours of sleep at night, and I wasn't. So it made me really appreciate fast packing, because I've done some over the years with my oldest son, and I have done several trips. And I really, really love to do that. I don't do it that often, but just because I'm freaking racing all the time. But it made me realize that like I really would like to fast pack more as I get older, and do more of it. And because it's such a beautiful trail. Colorado Trail is just amazing. I mean, you've done it, it's like off the hook. It's like,
so good that it sucks to see when you're so sleep deprived that you're not appreciating it.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my epiphany, that I want to appreciate it. So if I'm going to race, I'm going to race 250 or less. I told my wife after that, I won't go over 300 miles racing.
Totally.
Just to leave that, Arizona 300 monster as a possibility down the road. But I really appreciate the 200 distance. And I think the other thing that's really cool about 200s is just all the other little things you kind of got to figure out. I have a lot of athletes that come to me that haven't run that many hundreds that want to run 200s. And I'm like, really, you need to get to the point where hundreds just kind of bounce off of you. Like, I can go do them. I don't make any major mistakes. I know how to take care of myself. Because otherwise the 200 becomes a major sufferfest. And if you figure out in something with less sleep deprivation and just like feet and, nutrition and hydration and just efficiency and drop bags and all those little things and gear, go make mistakes in hundreds for a little bit and get to the point where you're like, I just knocked out like 300s this year. No problem. Was smooth. Then you're ready for like a 200 and you'll actually enjoy it. And
totally.
You won't suffer for 100 miles, I
will throw the caveat that a decent amount of fast packing or through hiking experience, you can tackle about 80 to 90% of those too.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Coming at it from the fast packing, if you look at like running the 200 as a kind of a faster fast pack, with less sleep, it's actually, that's why fast packers are really good at 200 plus.
Yeah, because you've already solved your feet. You know how to resupply. You've fueled yourself for multiple days. The only thing you're solving is sleep deprivation, which probably 60 to 70% of the people in a 200 don't have a good sleep strategy anyways, and probably even higher than that, actually.
Yeah. And that's a huge one. I mean, that's probably the number one. After I did Moab 240 as my first one in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, like, that one was like, sleep matters, even in the front, and you're only going to be out 2 nights. Like, strategic sleep makes a world of difference. And then after coaching people, and I coach Mike McKnight, I coach Sarah Ostazuski, like, with their front of the pack feedback on like hardly any sleep versus getting some sleep, and how well they perform better when they sleep, when they actually sleep. It's pretty like cut and dry that you perform better when you get a little more sleep.
Yeah.
So it just really brings in like you said, feet. If you can figure out feet and nutrition, and then you can figure out sleep, you're setting yourself up for a pretty successful 200, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the main trick is just, if you can sleep, you should sleep. But if you can't, you're going to lay there and wish you weren't trying to sleep.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
that's the tricky part of sleep.
It is really the tricky. It's so tricky. And caffeine, right? Strategic caffeine and managing your caffeine when you're going to sleep and not taking too much, 3 to 6 hours out from trying to sleep, all those kind of things, depending on the person, right? So like
Derek,
all that.
Yeah. Derek said we have to ask you about chafing at Moab.
Oh, man. Oh, dude. That's another one that I would put on the 200 plus list is chafing management. I had never had this bad of chafing. Oh my God. So I'm going to be fully transparent here, Jeff. So I get about, I want to say 180, 200 miles into Moab. And I'd never had this major issue before, but my penis head was chafed and it hurt so bad every step. And I couldn't figure out how to like manage it. So in my sleep deprived state at the end of night 2, so it's about dawn, I'm at Geyser Pass, right? At mile 200. And I go into the porta potty. I ask for some like, the gel little things that replace a blister. It replaces the skin.
Yeah.
Whatever those are called, like Compeed patch type thing.
Mm-hmm.
I took one of those and I went and I was in there for a while. My wife came over and checked on me, and I like opened the door and show her what I'm doing, and I'm putting it over the end of my penis, and it doesn't work. And then I had to rip it off, which and so it was bad. And so finally, I'm like reapplying lube constantly. It's not working because I'm past the point of like lube even helping. And I finally I have this MacGyver moment. If anybody watched TV and they're older, you know who I'm talking about. He could like fix anything with like hardly anything, like a multi-purpose tool and some gauze pads and ball bearings or something. And so anyway, I'm getting paced by Derek, and I stop, and I had a snack Ziploc, the tall, skinny ones, and I had salt in them, salt caps. So I took the salt caps, put them somewhere else, turned it wrong side out so I didn't have salt on the inside, lubed the inside, and just slid it over. And from that point forward, it was like, I was like, like it worked.
Wow.
And then you just have to take it off when you peed. So, and then put it right back on. So it was like, it worked like a champ. And I was like, okay, I have a tool for that in the future. If that ever happens again, that's what I'll do. So
yeah, that's the ingenuity it takes to run a 200. You never know what problem solving you're going to have to do.
That is gnarly. I'll probably only tell that story one time, and that's on your podcast.
I love it. That's what the month of Jeff is all about. All right, just one last topic to kind of bring it home is more like, where is this all going? So there's like this trail majors, there's UTMB, there's Western States and Hard Rock are impossible to get into. There's like the Western States thing. And yeah, where do you see like trail running going? Is it going to get very specified and specific of like someone who can only be good at a Hard Rock type of thing in 10 years or something, because athletes are so specialized? It's just segmented so much in my time of running.
Yeah, you don't see the general, like you used to always race everything, right? 50Ks, 50 milers, 100K, 100 milers. So yeah, I do think it's going to become more specialized. I think that is a trend that we're seeing, and I think that'll continue. I mean, I think you'll still have certain athletes that kind of make the jump to different stuff. I think Killian's a good example of like doing the shorter stuff like Stairs and All and stuff like that, and then doing stuff like UTMB, right? So I think we'll always have those kind of athletes, but then I think there's always going to be the specialty athletes too that are really good at mountain races. We all have our skill sets that we kind of feel like we're good at and that we like to do. And, mine's always been kind of mountain stuff, and I still love that and I'm attracted to it. So, I'm going to continue to focus on it. And I like the 100-mile distance. I still love the 100-mile distance. I like to dabble in the 200s, I like to say, but not like, I'm not fully committed yet. I don't feel like that's my identity quite yet, but I'm interested in them as I get older. I think one of the things the aging experienced athlete who's still relatively strong runner can do is perform really well in like 200 plus. So I'll continue to like kind of dabble in them. And I want to do, obviously I want to do Cocodona again, I mean, I know I said at the finish line, if anybody was watching the live feed, that I would never do it again, but by the next day, I was already like woke up going, I think I could improve there. And I think I could do better there, So
Totally.
I was already self-analyzing my performance of where I could change.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that was a little bittersweet.
Totally. I do. A bonus last question. Do you know, or the cause or how to preventable of like, I think everyone probably in the top 10 had a little of that bloating, and then especially Mike too. Have you been able to solve that root cause or mitigate the problem?
We've narrowed it down to a couple of things. So one of the things I've learned, with the precision hydration test that's out there on like your sodium concentration per liter of sweat, right? That's a medical grade test. I kind of recommend it to all our athletes to go get it. So we have that data point. Now, one of the things I've learned is that, yes, that's a genetic number, but some people are more adapted to having less concentration in their sweat or performing on less salt per liter than what their actual loss rate is. So, so what we're now recommending to athletes is something like, okay, well, if your number's 1,000 milligrams per liter, then let's start somewhere in the 80 to 90% range. But if you're having some issues, we might need to be a little lower. It might need to be 70%. One of the things we figured out with Mike is he's an outlier, and I think he does better on like 70% of that number, right? Or 80% of that number, but not 100%. Like I perform better on 100% of my number, but he does better on like less, and he does better on less drink rate, meaning his scale test, like an hour scale test to see how much you lose at a certain output, like weight wise. So how your volume of sweat per hour, his is really high, but he, for some reason, performs better when he drinks less. He doesn't bloat and all those other factors. So, and that's one of the big things that happened at Cocodona, because he just finally got his precision test and he did his scale tests, and he was drinking a ton of water, and he's taking a ton of salt. And I think for him, it was too much. And he also made some mistakes with not taking enough potassium. He made a mistake and brought a bottle of sodium only and not sodium potassium. Like Relight makes a sodium only and a sodium potassium and magnesium and calcium in it. And he took, instead of taking the Relight Plus caps, he took the Relight caps, which only have sodium. And you need a percentage of potassium. The body likes a ratio of sodium to potassium. And so if you're just taking sodium and no potassium, the body just retains water. So I think that was another factor for him. And then at some point you start making all these crazy adjustments because you're bloated. And then you make all kinds of additional mistakes, like, oh, it must be salt. And then you take all salt out, and then you're just drinking water and not absorbing it. So you bloat worse, so there's all these like trickle down effects. So I think he made a lot of mistakes during that, and it was a learning experience for him. And I think hopefully we've figured that out and adjusted for it. So
yeah. And the fun thing about all this is, I mean, there's zero studies that cover this type of terrain, this temperature range, body over this long. And then also there's multiple types of salt too, or sodium. So you can throw
ratios and
exactly.
Everything. Dude, it's a complex puzzle, and and everyone's a little different. Like, some are outliers and some aren't. And like, there's just like, that's what I love about this sport. It's just so, there's some general rules, but there's a lot of individual stuff, and you have to kind of figure out for yourself with some trial and error. Even with a coach, you're okay, give me feedback. Okay, tighten the screws a little. Try this, right?
Yeah.
Add 100 milligrams per liter to your sodium intake, because you're having this symptom, or whatever. So,
and a coach, the benefit of a coach is they'll help you solve those types of equations or work with you or come up with
and
other
systematically
solutions.
help you. Like they should. Like one of the things we do is especially when I'm first coaching someone in the first 6 months, we download after races. Like, okay, what did you, I want a report card. How much sodium did you take? How much did you drink? How many liters?
Yep.
I need you to keep track of all the things. We have them like put all their trash in a Ziploc bag during the race and then throw it in a drop bag or give it to crew and put it all in one place. And at the end, say, okay, I took, 18 gels and, five bags of chews and, whatever, and try to like analyze like the amount of calories they had per hour, how much sodium they had, how much potassium they had. And that helps us like go, oh, you're close to what your tests say, right? Or you're way off. Here's the glaring problem,
Yeah. Yeah. You'd be a scary guy to not do your homework for, it sounds like.
Yeah, I will. I'm sitting there with like a calculator and making notes while we're on a coaching call. And then we're doing math. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize I took that much sodium. I'm like, yeah, you're like over sodium, like 500 milligrams per liter or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. I'll let you get off and get to the coaching call, but it's always fun to speak to Jeffs. Oh yeah. Why Bronco Billy? Why, how did that come up?
I have a really good buddy. So we were talking about those early days of ultra running. I had a mentor. He was younger than me, but he was he'd been in ultra running for a while. And was kind of like the best ultra runner at the time in Bend, Oregon in the early 2000s. Jason Moyer, great all around athlete, amazing backcountry skier, and ski-mo racer, and, really, really amazing runner. And he and I hung out a lot in my first like 2 or 3 years in the sport and ran together a lot. At the time I only had one kid. And so I got a little longer leash at those times because we only had one kid to take care of. It wasn't like zone defense. And so like he and I like really hung out a lot. I paced him at Wasatch and we trained a lot together. And at the time, he claimed to be from a direct descendant from the Berserker tribe, right? He was very Nordic, looking. And so he always said he was a Viking, right? And so I started calling him Berserker as a nickname. And I grew up in Missouri, so everybody had nicknames, right? You nickname people, but you couldn't pick your own nickname. That wasn't allowed. Someone had to give you a nickname, right? And so I'd give him Berserker. And at the time, I had come out of the climbing scene in Denver in the late 90s, and a buddy of mine from Wyoming that we all climbed together, this group of us climbed together in the late 90s. And we used to use in the gym and outside when we were climbing, we used to use the word giddy up all the time because he came from Wyoming and it was just a catchphrase. And he used it for everything. And because I was a farm boy, I immediately grasped onto that term and I would yell, so if you're like, you're sitting there thinking about making a move, we'd be like, giddy up,
Yep.
Or if you nail a move, you'd be like, giddy up, and so there's all these different ways you could use giddy up. And so I was in the habit after all those climbing years of using that term all the time just for stoke or whatever. And so I used it quite a bit. And so he just started all of a sudden calling me Bronco Billy. I don't know where he got it. He just started calling me Bronco Billy. And I started a blog in 2004 for my family in the Midwest, just to tell them what I was doing. I'm doing 100 milers. And they were like, what are you doing? You're running 100 miles like in mountains. What? Are you crazy? And so I was doing these little race reports and I being in marketing, I was trying to make them interesting, like an article, and like Bronco Billy became in this story. First, I couldn't find a URL. Like I was in graphic design and branding, and doing internet and doing early websites. And so I was looking for jeffbrowning.com, wasn't available, right? So I was like, okay, well, I need something that kind of says me. And then I looked for Bronco Billy and it wasn't available, but I was like, I need an action word. So like I came up with go. I didn't come up with run because I was like, what if I get injured and I can't run anymore and I can only ride my bike? It's got to be some just movement. So it was Go Bronco Billy. So I came up with gobroncobilly.com. That became my blog. And I started doing these race reports with photos, and Bronco was like my alter ego, like he doesn't come out until like halfway through the race. Like he wants to race early, but you got to keep him in the stable. He's stamping his foot. He's like, you know, and so it was kind of just to be funny. But during that time, blogs got popular. You know, we talked about this earlier in the interview. And so blogs blew up. Everybody was following people's blogs. I got a bunch of followers on my blog at the time. And people were making comments all the time after race reports. And so I started a bunch of people in the sport, Chrissy Mail, Ty Draney, bunch of other like kind of early, like if anybody knows Rock Horton, some of the early athletes in the sport that were kind of influencers, you'd call them, before social media.
Yeah.
Right. They also started calling me Bronco, like as a kind of a nickname. And so they didn't even call me Jeff anymore. Like that, my name, like I got to the point where people didn't even know my first name sometimes. They just knew me as Bronco. So I'd hear people saying, "Go Bronco" at races and stuff like that. And it just started, kind of took on a name or a life of its own. And then it stuck, you know. And then when social media came out, of course, I already had a blog. So I was like, well, I got to get Go Bronco Billy on Instagram and Go Bronco Billy on Facebook and Go Bronco Billy on Twitter and, you know, or X. And so, you know, I just, you know, was early adopter of all those technologies. And so
it's like a life hack too, of like, you're already getting people to root for you and you're putting a positive spin on yourself. Like, yeah, my name's Go Bronco Billy. It's like, I'm already positively positioning myself.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, one thing we didn't talk about tonight is mindset training in 200s and 100s. Mindset's huge. And like, be able to have something that makes you trip something in the second half of a race when you're tired and you don't want to race anymore. And you're like, no, Bronco's coming out like in the second half, you know?
Yeah, I think mine's right here. This guy.
Yeah, exactly, dude.
The tiger.
It is the tiger. So everybody has their, you know, ultra running alter ego. And so you got to tap into the alter ego sometimes, because sometimes like Jeff Browning doesn't want to race, you know?
Totally. But Jeff Browning's only human.
Yeah, Bronco Billy has superpowers.
Totally. All right, let's end it there. Thanks so much. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, man. Happy holidays, brother.
You too. Thank you for listening. Hopefully there was some good stuff in there. Jeff is really knowledgeable. He's been around the sport so long. I left in a couple little flubs I had of speaking. I sometimes edit stuff like that out, but you know, might as well be real here. All right. Thank you guys for listening. As always, you subscribe. That's great. We have some partnerships coming, so that's really cool. So yeah, really just appreciate you guys. I'm going to be traveling a lot, but I have, 4 more Jeffs I think we'll be putting out episodes about. So thank you guys and stay elite, my friends.